Thanks, Daryl. Good evening. My name is Matt C. I'm an alcoholic. My sobriety date is December 3rd, 1992. My home group is the Meeting House Group, which meets in Phoenixville at 7 o'clock on Sunday evenings. And you're all welcome. I have a sponsor. His name is Woody K. And this is a reading from the 12 and 12. Who cares to admit complete defeat? Practically no one, of course. Every natural instinct cries out against the idea of permanent powerlessness. It's truly awful to admit that, glass in hand, we have warped our minds into such an obsession for destructive drinking that only an act of providence can remove it from us. No other kind of bankruptcy is like this one. Alcohol, now become the rapacious creditor, bleeds us of all self-sufficiency and all will to resist its demands. Once this stark fact is accepted, our bankruptcy as going human concerns is complete. And it's my great honor to have been given the privilege to introduce our speaker this evening, speaking on 10,000 years of powerlessness, Bob D. from Las Vegas.
I'm Bob D. I'm an alcoholic. I want to thank the members of the committee for their service. I want to thank you for the introduction. And we share our experience here. And Chris asked me to talk on 10,000 years of powerlessness. I hope I don't look that old. How many people, I'm curious, how many people are in their first 2 years of sobriety? Wow, okay. Wow. The reason I asked that, at about 2 years sober, or a little over 2 years sober, my sponsor asked me to read a book called Not God by Ernest Kurtz. And I found that there's different ways you can put yourself to sleep sober. And reading that book was one of them, I'll tell you. It was like, what? It's like, and the part of the problem is I hadn't fallen in love with AA yet. Now, I was very active. I went to 15 meetings a week. I had service commitments. I had a sponsor. I was taking a stab at some of the steps. But I think for most of us, at least guys like me, it took years here before I fell in love with Alcoholics Anonymous. And when I fell in love with AA, I went back years, many, many years later, and I reread that book, and it was fascinating to me. And it's just like the traditions, the history of AA, all of that. And that book, Not God, is one of the most definitive books of the history of Alcoholics Anonymous. But it's a tough read unless you're in love with AA. If you're in love with AA, it's a fascinating read. And I didn't care that much about the history for the same reason that most of us don't care about things like that, or the traditions or anything like that. Because what the hell does it have to do with me? You know, I'm concerned about me. And in my early sobriety, it's all about me. Now, I liked AA because it helped me, but I don't want traditions, history. But then, something happens to guys like me. You get involved in this thing. You start to sponsor people, and there's a funny dynamic that you will inevitably fall in love with anything you serve. Some of you know that from your children. And you will stay in love with anything you continue to serve. And As after years of service in Alcoholics Anonymous, it started to change my heart. And this became more important often than this. And that is a big transformation for a self-centered guy. I love that introduction that you read at the beginning of the meeting from page 570. I think it's the most definitive description of Alcoholics Anonymous ever written. And when he says in there that we're not only are we people who learn that they must not drink, but as we throw ourselves into helping others with similar problems, we often overcome our excessive concentration upon ourselves. Oh my God, is it that obvious? You know what I mean? He was a non-alcoholic, he saw that. I mean, is that obvious? That I just obsessively self-concerned. And then from that, I suffer from depression and anxiety and horrible, lonely feelings of separateness. But I'm not alone in that. Since the beginning of recorded history, there's always been guys like me. A tiny little minority of societies, but we've always existed. These misfits that for some reason, they don't feel like the other people in their community look. For some reason, they have an inability to connect with people the way other people connect with each other. They're very prone to depression, anxiety, resentments, anger. They're just misfits. And not all of the misfits have this experience, but some of them, they find that when they drink alcohol, it is the most immediate and the most dynamic medicine for all those problems that they've ever found. And they become obsessed with this effect produced by alcohol. And this has been going on since the beginning of recorded history. And these people would inevitably drink themselves to death. They would just destroy everyone that cared about them in the process. They would make societies and sometimes villages and towns and often countries like Russia almost dysfunctional from alcoholism, from the extremity of it. And there's been, from the beginning of recorded history, there's been countless futile attempts to help poor sots like me. And none of them have worked. And I have a book at home called The Slaying of the Dragon. It's a history of failed attempts to fix guys like me. And they tried crazy stuff. They used to drill holes in our skulls to let the demons out. Because to normal people, they go, you must be possessed by demons. You're doing that again? You must be possessed. They used to burn us at the stake. And if you ever go to Bermuda in the square, they had 2 treatments for alcoholism. And one was for women, and it was called the dunking chair. They'd strap you in this chair over the water, and they would submerge you into the water. And if you didn't drown, they'd do that so many times that they'd think, now surely after that torturous event, they're not going to possibly drink again, and it didn't work. They had this thing, they had a stockade where they put your hands and your head in this thing, and you'd be stuck there. And back in those days, they didn't have indoor plumbing, so underneath the bed you had what is called a pea pot. And you'd go to the bathroom in that pot, and they'd come out in the morning and they'd empty the pea pots in the drunk's face, thinking that'll disgust him into never drinking again. That worked for 10 minutes. The minute you let him out of the stock, he needs a drink. He needs a drink bad. They tried crazy stuff. If you ever saw the movie Francis, it's a real account of a silent movie star. Jessica Lange won an Academy Award playing the part, who had alcoholism, and they did everything from electroshock therapy to lobotomy, and nothing seemed to really get hold. I was been to Russia a couple of times. I can't go now, really, but I've been there a few times before it got too crazy. And my first time over there, I saw something that was just astounded me. I was doing a workshop with translators, because I don't speak Russian, and very few people at that time spoke English. And we had an Al-Anon translator and an AA translator, members of those fellowships. And spent the weekend taking turns translating what we were doing. And this guy comes up to me and he's very excited and he wants to tell me a story. But he doesn't speak English, so we had to grab one of the translators. We grabbed the Al-Anon, because she was handy. Grabbed the Al-Anon translator, and she's translating a story from this Russian guy. And evidently, before the collapse of the Soviet Union, the Soviets had tried everything because alcoholism was making their society dysfunctional. I mean, it's bad over there. You'll see guys passed out at 7 o'clock in the morning on the sidewalk. You'll see them chugging bottles of vodka that early in the morning. I mean, it's pretty bad over there. And so one of the last-ditch efforts, and they tried so many things, was their scientists had devised a chip. And if you were a horrible alcoholic, they would surgically implant this chip into the muscle tissue in the middle of your back. And if you drank, it detected it and released a toxin into your bloodstream that, from the description, it sounded like it must have been like some super antabuse or something. It wasn't designed to kill you, but if you're in bad shape, it maybe. But it would just make you wish you were dead for about 2 days. It was like a horrible thing. And as the guy's telling me the story through the Al-Anon translator, he pushes his shirt up and turns around, and he's got this hideous scar in the middle of his back. And he told us that after over a year of no relief, after over a year of abstinence, he begged his best friend to take a kitchen knife and cut that chip out of him so he could go feel better. Now, the Al-Anon translator was horrified by that story. I, on the other hand, was horrified that he waited a year. Right? Because I know what it's like to live with untreated alcoholism. You get to a point where if I don't get a drink, I'm going to die. But if I drink, I'll die. Well, I don't care. I'm going to die if I don't drink. It's a bad deal. Because guys like me don't have drinking problems. I'm chronic by nature. I'm not an acute alcoholic. My problem doesn't end where the bottle ends. It starts. And that is the mystery of alcoholism. And for thousands of years, there's been attempts to help us. Medicine, religions have all taken a stab at us. Hindus, Buddhists, Catholics, Protestants, Jews, they've all taken a stab at this thing. Psychiatry, medicine has taken a lot of stabs at this thing. And as Dr. Silkworth says in the doctor's opinion, with very little success, once in a while. And in 1934, in December, a guy who'd been in hospital before, and he was a hopeless alcoholic, he ended up again in Towns Hospital in New York City. On December 11th, he checked in there, and he was what they referred to as a hopeless alcoholic. His doctor, the psychiatrist, had told his wife that he's going to die. His only hope maybe would be to lock him up somewhere where he can't get a drink. Maybe that might work. But you know how we are. We alcoholics can find a way to drink in places you think, well, you can't get a drink there. Oh, yes, I can. I swear to God, you could drop me out of an airplane with a parachute in a strange city, and within 10 minutes, I'll find people just like me. Right? And we're good with that. I was in a meeting recently, and somebody was talking about drinking cough medicine. I said, oh yeah, cough medicine. Yeah, I've done that. Livorce, they were talking about cinnamon flavored Livorce. Now, I haven't tried cinnamon, but that waits for me. That's a possibility one day. But I've drank a lot of cough medicine. I drank vanilla extract, which nobody knows you're drinking, but you get cookie breath. It's kind of different. But when I need a drink, I need a drink. And so in 1934, this guy goes into the hospital and something happens to him. An old buddy of his had been talking to him and then came into the hospital along with this guy, Roland, and they gave him a book. It was a transcribed set of lectures from a guy named William James. And the guy had that book because his psychiatrist in Switzerland had met James. And James was a game changer. James was one of those guys, every generation might have one that's able to make leaps in knowledge beyond anything that makes sense. And James was brilliant, and he wrote a bunch of lectures that he gave at Edinburgh University, and he met Carl Jung. Carl Jung was they were at a conference. He was Sigmund Freud's apprentice, and James told Jung about these experiences that he'd been trying to chronicle, about these transformations that happen. And they've been happening, and James tried to look at them from a scientific point of view, an objective point of view. What's this about? What are these experiences about? And they're hard to figure out. Treatment centers later tried to induce them, by confrontational therapy and that kind of stuff, put you on the hot seat. We'll break you down. Hopefully, if we break you down, you'll have one of those experiences. Most of us just get mad or depressed. We don't have it. It doesn't indulge us in that venue. But William James discovered that people who had those experiences had two things in common. And the first thing they all had in common is you never have one of those experiences when you've been doing well. You didn't get a raise. Your wife didn't tell you how wonderful you are. Your kids don't like. It's usually when you're losing everything. Your life is slipping out between your fingers. You're suicidal. If you're not actually trying it, you're wishing you were dead. You're at a point of hopelessness. You're broken. And those are the moments that these rare cases, these phenomena seem to occur. And the second thing that they seem to have in common, I don't know, but I suspect this one is the one that influenced Wilson, is that if you read that, you'll often find that these spiritual experiences were often transitory, and they faded like smoke in the wind. And we know that. How many times do we run into members of Alcoholics Anonymous who have been sober several years because of a born-again experience, and then they drank again? I bet you there's people in this room that have had, either through therapy or religion, have had transformational experiences and then drank again because they don't stick. They're transitory experiences. And so for thousands of years, there's been something that's suspect. And what's suspect is that there's some sort of power source, and religious people would often try to introduce it to the alcoholic as God. That God this power seems to be the answer. But the problem is, alcoholics are blocked from that power in a peculiar way. That's why people who have drinking problems, not chronic alcoholics, have drinking problems, can often get sober for a lifetime in church, or going to the gym for that matter, or therapy. But guys like me can have an amazing spiritual experience. And some of you have had this where maybe you just did your fifth step and you're just changed. You and God are like this. You know what I mean? It's just like, oh my God, this is amazing. And a week later, you know what's wrong with everybody, and you're just angry and just, kind of on the muscle with people because it fades. And as the great psychiatrist Harry Thibault talks about this need for ego reduction and depth. And then he says something that's so true. You can get small. You can be crushed. But the ego has amazing recuperative powers. It grows back like a bad tumor. And it comes back. And I'm sure everyone in this room has had those experiences where you have some small degree of humility and right-sizedness, and you're you're not judging anybody. Your opinions have been put to rest. And then the ego comes back. And you just start noticing what's wrong with people. And you start playing God again, you know. My first sponsor used to say that to me all the time. I'd go to him, my early sobriety, I'm a collector of information about how out of line people are. I'm good at it. I just see it quickly. I just see it. I notice it quite a bit. And I would come, I'd just be jacked up. Just all the wrong people. I'd go into his office and I'd dump it all on his desk. The wrong people. This guy's selling Amway in the parking lot of the A Club, you know. And he's a 13-stepper. My sponsor said, "You're just jealous. He's getting more than you are." No, it's not that. It's wrong. It's wrong. And I'd had all these cases built on people, and he'd always say the same thing, and I didn't get it. He'd say, "You got to quit playing God." And I didn't say this to him, but I always think, I'm not playing God. I'm reporting accurate information here. And I was playing God. And Chamberlain, who was my sponsor of 28, 29 years as sponsor, used to say that there was one problem, and it contained all problems. And that was conscious and unconscious separation between me and you and me and God. And even in a peculiar way between me and me. That I've lost myself by the time I get sober. I've desperately, because I'm obsessed with what you think of me, I've desperately tried to be so many different things to so many people that I don't know who I am anymore. That this need for gratification, for self-grandizement, this self-centeredness that drives me, has driven me to do something that non-alcoholics rarely are driven to do. And that is to compromise my own moral compass. Non-alcoholics rarely are compromised the way I can be compromised so easily. I know my only benchmark, not my only, but my main benchmark for normalcy is my daughter. I think she's pretty normal. She's well-adjusted. She's a giver by nature. She exhibits naturally what I have to go to 7 meetings a week, have a sponsor, and work the steps just to get close to. You know what I'm saying, right? And we used to go on a daddy-daughter date night every week, once a week. And when I turned 60, I was eligible. We'd go to dinner and a movie. And when I was 60, I was eligible for the discounted tickets. So one night we're going to the movie, and I get the 2 tickets out of the machine, give her one of the tickets, and she said, "Oh, Dad, this is not the right ticket. This is your ticket." I said, No, Kate, that's your ticket. She says, "Dad, it says senior on it." Well, I wanted to run. I said, "No, they both say senior." She said, "Dad, you can't do that. That's not right." And I was so ashamed I had to go to the booth and pay the difference. And she would never occur to her to do that. Her level of self-involvement and self-obsession will not push her to compromise her own moral compass as it will me. And listen, here's the pathetic part about this. This is all over like $1.25. You know what I mean? I will throw my moral compass and the way I feel about myself out the window for $1.25. Oh my God, that's so pathetic. So by the time I get to Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not only separate from God and separate from you, and I am separate from you. Boy, there's a loneliness about early sobriety. You sit in those meetings where all the happy, clappy people are with a feeling like it's all of you and then there's me, you know, just that separateness. But I'm separate from myself. And you know, people can tell you this, and maybe therapists have told you this, or maybe your priest or your minister has told you this, or maybe you just kind of intuitively knew from attending Alcoholics Anonymous meetings as a relapser that there were people in AA that their life was being transformed and they were doing really well, and God seemed to be, according to them, the reason. The problem is knowing that doesn't access God for me. And this, Alcoholics Anonymous is often referred to by people who really don't understand what we do here as a faith-based program. And I understand that it looks that way, but it's not a faith-based program, it's an action-based program. There's something about me that I can have the most amazing relationship with God, and it easily degrades and corrupts, and I fill up with myself. My very spiritual nature is like the back of a toilet tank. You can work those steps and surrender and flush that toilet, the water just drains out of it. You can bet your ass that immediately I'll start filling up with me again. You know? And it just happens. And I don't know that it's happening. And so the answer is God, but the problem is what it refers to over and over and over again in our book is the blockage. It starts, page 55, talks about the great reality deep down within us. And it's there. It says in the last analysis, Bob, it's only there you're going to find this power, this great reality. But you can't find it right now, can you? No, I can't. And some of you have probably done what I did in early sobriety. People talk about listening to the still, small voice of God within, and you think, I'm going to be quiet and go within. And I go in within, and I don't run into God, I run into Legion. I mean, just, oh my gosh, it's crazy. Crazy person. Because as it says in the book, I'm obscured. God's blocked from me. I'm obscured from this by aspects of self, pomp, calamity. You know how you talk. Do you ever know how you talk to yourself in your head? The greatest trick my ego ever did was convince me that this is me. It's not me. I'm the idiot that listens to it. That's not me. And so I'm blocked. I got so much pomp, so much calamity, so much obsession, or as the book refers to, worship. Obsessively turning my consciousness towards something. I get obsessive about stuff. Her, that, money, the job, how I feel, big piece of business. And until it blocks out all light in my life. And so I'm blocked from God. And then coming out the backside of the third step, it says the same thing again. It says, oh, Bob, this decision you just made is vital and crucial step. But it'll have little permanent effect unless acted at once upon to get rid of the things in you that are blocking you. And I'll tell you, I know what that feels like. To be at AA is referred to sometimes as a spiritual banquet. And to sit in meetings of Alcoholics Anonymous and feel like my spirit is starving. And I don't know what's wrong. And I know what's wrong when it happens today. It's me. I filled up with me. I got too much of me between me and you. I got too much of me between me and God. The resurgence of the ego is hideous. And mine, and the way it talks to me in my own voice. So I don't understand that I think it's me, because it's my voice. And I don't know about you guys, but I like the sound of my voice, and I always thought it was brilliant. And it's not me. And my ego is so clever. I often wonder if it's not smarter than I am. Because it came to AA with me, and I think it learned some of this stuff here quicker than I did. And it uses it, and it uses it. I remember I was one of the first guys back in the early 80s. I started doing big book stuff, and my ego jumped on board with that, just like it did with the traditions, like it does with knowledge, because my ego loves information. It loves knowledge, because it puffs me up into being the I know guy. And I remember going, it's pathetic to admit this, but I went to a meeting one day, and I was doing I just did a 4-step workshop for the Las Vegas Roundup, and they asked me to do it because I was the only one that really knew. And yeah, I know, yeah. Pride goeth before a fall. And I go to this meeting, and the subject is step 4, right? And there's people sharing, and the guy that's chairing the meeting is sober a little longer than I am. He's a good AA member, and he's sharing, and he's calling on people that, sad, but they really don't know what they're talking about. But that's okay. I know by the end of the meeting he's going to call on me, and I'll clean this mess up. And the meeting ends, and he doesn't call on me. Now I'm mad. Now it's not just that my feelings are hurt. He doesn't realize he's destroying AA. Right? I like to take my resentments global, And I'm mad, and I'm angry. I'm just fed up. After the meeting, he says, "What do you think of the meeting?" I said, "It was a lousy meeting." He said, "I thought it was a good meeting." "It was a terrible meeting. Nobody who called on even knows anything about step 4. He said, "I thought there were some good shares." "Oh, you don't even know about it. You've never worked step 4, have you?" The guy was sober longer than I was. He said, "Yeah, I did step 4. I said, "Okay, what's it say on the top of page 76, 77, right? What's this is our core?" And he's like looking at me like I didn't come here prepared for a test. And it was all ego. It was all ego. The one of the things that was transforming me, and that was bringing some light and some good into my life, my ego knows no end to what it will use to grandize me, to separate me, to puff me up. And that's the thing I deal with. I wish that alcoholism wasn't a chronic spiritual malady. I wish the resurgence of my ego wasn't chronic in nature, but it's chronic. And I came here, like a lot of us come here, thinking that my problem was drinking. And it is if I drink. But the real problem that guys like me experience is sobriety. How do I stay sober? How do I deal with me and the weirdness of me and the loneliness of me and the depressive nature of me and the anxiousness of me? And how I build cases and opinions about people and separate myself. How do you live with that if that is your natural inclination? Well, some of us work the steps over, and I'm doing another 5th step on the phone with my sponsor Sunday, because I've done it. I've gone through the steps a lot, but I get weird quick. I just do. I love the 3rd tradition in the original that Bill Wilson wrote when he says membership should include all who suffer from alcoholism. Everything I do in AA, I do it because without these actions, I will suffer severely from alcoholism, which really starts where the bottle ends. I mean, why do you think guys like me, we're not stupid? I know what I've done to my loved ones. I know what I've done to my life. I've sworn to myself time and time again, sometimes sobbing uncontrollably, I'm never going to touch that stuff again. What makes me go back to it? Under those conditions, I'm not dumb. I don't need no lectures on drinking. What I need is a transformation so I can relax into this thing called abstinence that feels very weird to me. Abstinence always felt like I was doing time. It always feels, and I'm everything it talks about in the book. So in Towns Hospital in 1934, Bill Wilson was taken through a rudimentary thing of the 12, it wasn't 12 steps, it was just a few that came from the Oxford group, and he had a spiritual experience of sorts, not unlike the kind that William James talked about. But he'd read James's book, and he knew that these experiences were often transitory. And he was scared. What if this wears off? Because Silkworth, he said to Silkworth, "Man, something's happened." And Silkworth said, "You better hold on to it." And he's, "How do I hold on to it?" And he was laying in his hospital bed, and something happened. I think this is the moment, this was the game changer moment where God stepped in. And it wasn't when the wind from the high mountaintop blew through and the light got brighter. That's just something that's happened forever, intermittently, these phenomena. What seemed to cement it in place as Bill was laying there, and the thought came to him that this experience, that I feel like I'm out of the woods right now. This experience, maybe if I transmitted it, maybe there's hundreds, if not thousands, of people just like me out there. And if I could find them and I could transmit this experience to them, maybe I can stay sober. And he did. From the 15th of December, 1934, to May 10th, 1935, not even less than 5 months, Bill Wilson worked with what some historians estimate to be 96 failures. Nobody stayed sober. Now, that is amazing to me. Because I'd work with 4 or 5, because I said I would, and hey. 96. One guy committed suicide in their house on Clinton Street. Another guy stole his suit, the one suit he had for job interviews, stole it. And he never gave up. Look, he was going to give up at one point. He was so frustrated. Nobody was staying sober. He told Lois, maybe I was wrong. I thought I had something here. I thought I had a game changer here. I thought I had something that I could transmit, and nobody's staying sober. And she said the inevitable simplicity, well, you're sober, Bill. And he got a little more hope and a little more back in line with his original conviction, and he went and talked to Dr. Silkworth, and Silkworth straightened him out pretty good, because he was preaching to these people. Because that was his experience. He knew it was God, so he was preaching. And Silkworth said, that's good, except you're not going to reach anybody that way. Why don't you tenderize them first with the truth, as we've tried to do with you in Towns Hospital about the allergy and the phenomenon, the craving, the hopeless condition. Tell him about your own failures. And, of course, Dr. Bob went to Akron. It was his one chance to get back on his feet. He'd been, and I'm sure this was humiliating to him, but his poor wife, who had been a debutante, was working at Lozer's department store for a little bit of nothing money, just to keep food on the table. And he had an opportunity to get back on his feet financially in a proxy fight in Akron, and he went there. Thing fell apart. And there's a little scene in the book where he talks about pacing the lobby of the Mayflower Hotel, and I've done meetings in that lobby on several occasions. And one of them, I started sobbing because they asked me to read the part of the book where Bill's pacing the lobby, and I'm reading it in the place where he was pacing the lobby. It was just overwhelming to me. And he wanted to drink. Even the thought of drinking came back to him. Maybe started with, maybe I'll just go in there and have a ginger ale. And he said, well, maybe I could have one. And the minute he thought one drink, he got panicked. And he went over to a payphone in that lobby. And he called and he called and he called. And I think it was on the 10th call that he got this Reverend Tungsten. And Tunks had just spoken to one of his people he knew, Henrietta Seiberling. And Henrietta had just had an experience with this washed-up proctologist, Dr. Bob, who admitted in T. Henry's house that he was a secret drinker. He couldn't stop. And they decided to pray for him, and they were praying for him and praying for him. And Henrietta gets a call from a guy from New York who says, I'm a rum hound from New York, and I need to talk to an alcoholic. And Tunks said, you might know someone. And Henrietta thought, oh my God, God's answered our prayers. And he wanted to hook him up right away. Well, they couldn't. Bill couldn't see Dr. Bob that day because Dr. Bob had gotten really drunk on Mother's Day and was taking a nap under the dining room table. I'm a napper. You gotta love a guy like that. I'm the guy who drinks until he's comatose. I'm that guy, right? Dr. Bob and I must have drank a lot of I got no off switch when I start. So I had to go see him the next day, and his son was a good friend of mine. His son stayed with us for a week. Told a whole bunch of us in my living room the story of driving his dad to the Cyberling gatehouse. He didn't want to go, but he's guilty. You know, he's drunk, got drunk for Mother's Day, screwed up Mother's Day. He's guilty. But he's in the car, and Smitty, the kid, is driving. His stepsister's sitting next to him, and Ann and Bob are in the back, and Bob is miserable. Bob's like, he's miserable like I get miserable when I'm guilty and hungover. You know, he's miserable like I get. And he said to Ann, he said, please, please. And he's saying to the whole car, please, just don't make me stay in there more than about 15 minutes. I can't take it. I'm shaking. I feel sick. Oh, please, 15 minutes. Don't let that guy lecture me more than 15 minutes. Get me out of there. And they kind of agreed to that. And he went in there, and hours and hours and hours went by. I asked Smitty, Smitty told us, how come you let your dad stay in there for that whole long period of time when you had already agreed to not keep him in there more than 15 minutes? And Smitty said, through the door, we could hear our father laugh, and he hadn't laughed in years. Boy, do I get that. One of the symptoms of my alcoholism was seriousness. You know, everything's a big deal. And he was laughing, and they let him stay in there, and he came out, and he's excited, and he's got his arm around Bill Wilson, and he says to Ann, he says, we should let him come and stay at our house for a while. And Bill, who didn't have enough money for his hotel bill or to go back to New York, must have said something like, well, if you insist. And he went and he stayed at Ardmore Street for a long time. And during that first month, Dr. Bob, and this is newcomer thinking. Now, Bill had no experience sponsoring people. Dr. Bob's the first guy that he's got any little traction with at all. And Bob says, you know, I got drunk at that medical convention last year and I embarrassed myself. I'm going to go back there now that I'm sober and show them. Well, a sponsor today would say, you're out of your mind. Stop it. You're not ready to do that yet at a month sober. But they didn't know. Dr. Bob went back to that medical convention in Atlantic City, got so drunk. Oh. And he drank like I drank. He was on the train coming back, and they get to Cayuga Falls Station in Ohio, and they can't rouse him. He's like in a coma almost. And I drink like that. I woke up at parties where they've decorated me and stuff, you know. Right. It's embarrassing. And they couldn't wake him up, so they carried him and they laid him on the platform. And his office gal came down and eventually got him back to Ardmore Street, where they put him to bed, and he was a wreck. And he was just out of it. And he came to on what was once believed to be early in the morning on June 10th. Now historians have found out when that convention was, and now they're starting to think it might have really been like June 17th. But regardless, our Founders' Day is locked in stone, I think, at June 10th. And he came to that morning, and he said he was just shaking horribly, out of control, like wanting to jump out of your skin. He came to like I came to off a bad drunk. And he says to Ann and Bill, what day is it? And they tell him, he goes, oh, no. I have a cancer. I have a surgery to perform this morning, and I cannot put it off. I already put it off once. And I have to go do this surgery. Well, his hands are like this. And they don't know what to do. So Bill gives him a sedative and a couple beers and pushes him into the surgery room. Imagine what being that patient, seeing your doctor coming in smelling like beer and shaking. I mean, I've talked to Frank Mauser and a whole bunch of people, searched the Akron City Hospital and St. Thomas Hospital records, trying to find out more information about that guy. We don't know what happened to him. Dr. Bob was a proctologist. All we know from AA literature is he lived. But did he whistle when he walked? We don't know. I mean, we have no idea what happened to that guy, you know? and the surgery, it must have been a very simple, short colon rectal cancer surgery. And he was done in the morning, still morning, and he disappeared. And everybody thought that he went and got drunk. Of course, I would have thought that. I gave him a beer, for God's sakes, and put him into the therapy, or into the surgery. And he disappeared, and his son said it was late at night, probably getting close to midnight before he finally came home. And he said everybody had been afraid he was out drinking, and he said he wasn't drinking. Matter of fact, he looked different. And what he was out doing is doing the one thing that he would not do. And he liked everything that was presented to him by Bill Wilson, the prayer and meditation, the confession of shortcomings, helping people. He loved all of it, but he dug his heels in when it came to amends. Because his pride was afraid, and he'd already damaged his reputation as a drunken doctor in Akron, and he didn't want to face any of that. And where he was for all those hours after that surgery, he wasn't drinking, he was out searching out every person he was afraid to make amends to. And consequently, when Dr. Bob came home that night, something was different. And he never took another drink again the rest of his natural life. He lived about 15 more years. In estimates that in those 15 years, he personally helped estimates of like 5,000 or more alcoholics. But he just didn't help them. He helped them and embedded in them an ethic of the importance of helping other alcoholics. And they transmitted that ethic to them to help other alcoholics. And I think in some way we are all here today because of one man's 8th step. One man who was resistant to doing this, and he finally became willing to go to any lengths. And that's what that really means. I remember in the years I was in and out, people would ask me, well, you're not willing to go to any lengths? I said, yes, I am. I'm willing to not drink and go to meetings. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking about facing all the things that you're afraid to face. And Bob was faced it all, and he never drank again. And Alcoholics Anonymous started getting some traction. But it was slow. I mean, it was a slow going for a while. They had a little group, got a couple people. They were still tied to the Oxford group because they didn't know what else to do. It was the one spiritual movement that they didn't seem to be in conflict with. And eventually they broke away from the Oxford group, and they started the first King's School meeting, which became Dr. Bob's home group. And AA started growing. There was a guy in Cleveland who was a writer for the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and he wrote an article. He interviewed a guy named Raleigh Helmsley, who was a ball player. And Raleigh had gotten sober, and Raleigh was like every newcomer that's finally got a foothold here is just on cloud nine, just absolutely in love with AA. And he just talked about it, and they wrote an article about it. And the Cleveland group was inundated with thousands of requests for help. And that's where Clarence Snyder and some of his guys rolled their sleeves up and went to work. There was a guy a couple years later named Jack Alexander, and Jack was a very well-respected journalist, and he wrote for several magazines, and he was one of those kind of guys that exposed fraud. He lived to expose fraud. He loved that stuff. He exposed some of the corruption in Philadelphia in the unions. He exposed one religion that was doing some pretty shady stuff. And he heard about Alcoholics Anonymous, and it was too good to be true. This has got to be crap, right? And he went into AA to find out the corruption that must surely exist. These people don't devote their lives without money or nothing. They're not they've got to be after prestige or money or notoriety, something. And he went to AA and he hung out with us. He ended up being on our board later. And he fell in love with us because he was astounded that we were exactly what we said we were. That there was nobody trying to make money off of helping people. There was nobody trying to promote themselves or any opinions or agendas. That these people had devoted their lives for fun, as my grand sponsor used to say, for fun and for free, to helping other people. And he was so amazed, he wrote this stellar article that brought thousands and thousands. I met people that got sober in the early 40s, like Hal Marino and Sybil, and those people that had gotten sober as a result, indirectly or directly, from Jack Alexander's article. It touched a lot of people worldwide. And Alcoholics Anonymous started growing. I mean growing. The problem is, as even companies that grow too fast, they get a little wobbly. And AA started getting corrupt, and they started having problems. And in the mid-40s, Bill Wilson became alarmed that there was something going on in AA that wasn't good. There was a lot of disunity. There was a lot of resentments that were occurring, and he, through meditation, he created the original, and I think finest form of the 12 traditions. The original form. It's close to what now is known as the long form. Very different from the short form. And Bill Wilson, for a couple years, tried to get groups to adopt them. He couldn't even get groups to read them because they're long. We used to read them in my old home group, and when they would read the long form, you just watch the eyes of the newcomers glaze over, just like, oh, make it stop. Let's get back to the important stuff that has to do with me. You know, I get it. And Bill eventually caved and agreed to back a short abbreviated version written by a guy out of Chicago named Earl Treat. And the short form was adopted, and the long form still exists. It's in the back of the book. Everybody I sponsor has to become familiar with that long form, because I think it is the essence of those spiritual principles. Not only are they essence of what will save AA, it saves our relationships. I applied them in my business. It was amazing the way it restores and creates unity and connectedness among people. And so here we are in 2024, almost 90 years from when Bill Wilson had his experience. Will we make another 90? I believe if we can stick with our fundamental principles, we can make another 90. There's a force in Alcoholics Anonymous that I think it seems to me like a codependent force that wants to change AA, and they're coming and they don't stop. A friend of mine on the literature committee, was telling me about how they want to change the book. I said, oh, they're not going to change the book. She said, you don't understand. They come stronger every year. These people are on a mission. And they're still active in AA today. And I tell you, I love Alcoholics Anonymous. I really love Alcoholics Anonymous. My God, in the history of the planet, there's never been anything that has affected the lives of alcoholics and their families and their employees and their employers and their neighbors the way that Alcoholics Anonymous. Chuck Chamberlain said it one time, it was so good. He said, if you could truly see the light that AA has brought into the world, it would be so bright it would burn your eyes out. All we see is little things here and there. We don't see the brightness of what AA has brought into the world. Billy Graham said in the 80s, he thought it was the greatest spiritual movement of the 20th century. So here we are. For the first time in this less than 90 years, for the first time in the history of the planet, there's been something that will save people like me from ourselves. There's more alcoholics sober right at this moment, sober over a year in probably 100-mile radius than there was in the whole planet since the beginning of time combined. We got something here. Let's keep it. Thanks for listening.